All right, guys, Monty here, retired lawyer, active father, and today we're going to be talking about the first 3 months of your baby's life, also known as the fourth trimester, and breastfeeding. Now, the first question might be, why not formula? And there's two reasons why I'm not going to be talking much about formula today. The first reason is that I'm not as familiar with formula because we did not use formula in the fourth trimester at all, except for days 3 and 4. And let me explain why and how we did that. I've mentioned in the previous videos that when a baby's first born, for the first couple days, they are, initially they're super alert, but then they're just overwhelmed by this like cascade of sleep, and they end up sleeping a lot. Well, they end up sleeping a lot in general, but for the first couple days after an initial period of alertness, they're super, super sleepy. They're not very hungry even, but they still need to be brought to the breast every 2 to 2.5 hours, maybe 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on what the doctors and nurses advise you. Both because it's good for their development and their sucking and suckling reflex and the skin-to-skin contact with mom, but also to help stimulate and ramp up mom's milk production. Right? Well, in our case, it was day 3. We were at the hospital and we were first-time parents. We were nervous about whether mom's milk was coming in, whether the baby was getting enough to eat. We had never done it before, and we were just anxious about all that. And actually, I remember one or more of the nurses even telling us on or about day 3 that, boy, he's hungry. We should supplement with formula. What we began to do that day is the nurses may have put the bottle in his mouth too, but I do recall specifically that we would dribble or drop a little bit of formula right on mom's breast, on or near the areola, basically where the baby was going to latch anyway, and we would kind of supplement the colostrum or the transitional milk if it was coming in at that point, which we didn't know, but we were supplementing whatever he was getting from the breast with a little bit of formula. That carried over into day 4, which is when we were discharged from the hospital, and I have in my notes that I look back on that on day 4 when we got home, we were still supplementing with formula. In fact, we were giving them, 10 milliliters, 20 milliliters, more than just a few drops. Again, we were just anxious about the milk, and it's interesting because my wife has told me, she never felt anything. She didn't feel the milk flowing through her breast, and I think that's common or perhaps even universal. So, later on, you kind of look and listen for the sucking and swallowing sounds. Later on, it just becomes kind of self-evident that the baby's nursing and getting the food he needs. But in the early days, that can be a source of worry. So we were still supplementing with the formula. And that first night at home, which was day 4, ended up being a terrible night for us because unbeknownst to us, mom's milk had come in a rush. Sometime between days 3 and 4, maybe it was already coming in and we just didn't know. But the baby ended up crying all night long. We hardly got a wink of sleep. And I was on the phone in the middle of the night with the hospital and the telephone advice nurse trying to do some sleuthing and figure out what the issue was. And after, some Q&A, the feedback we got from the nurse, which turned out to be accurate and spot on, was that we were probably overfeeding him. And in hindsight, that turned out to be exactly what it was. So we discontinued the formula right then and there, and we never looked back. So from the next morning, it was breastfeeding all the way. So the first reason I'm not going to talk much about formula is because I'm just not familiar with its use in the fourth trimester. But the second more important reason, guys, is that the evidence and is clear, that the choice is clear, that in the fourth trimester, breast is best by far. And let us just count the ways. I've drawn up a list of 10 reasons why you should favor breast milk in the first 3 months of your baby's life. Uh, Number one, breast milk is a veritable superfood that's tailor-made for human babies. Um, there's an aspect of common sense to this because um, we are animals at the end of the day, and it just seems obvious to me that humankind cannot possibly replace, and at least to this point in time in history, we are not able to replace the food that God and nature has specifically designed as the perfect starter food for our human babies. The What to Expect series of books says that breast milk contains at least 100 ingredients that are not found in cow's milk and that cannot be synthesized in a lab. The book does not expound or expand on what those 100 ingredients are. I have not fact checked that myself, other than, well, I haven't fact checked it. I mean, I'll note that the What to Expect books are written and or reviewed by doctors, and they really, really are good encyclopedic books that try to cover the whole terrain and give competing viewpoints and make allowances for things that we're not quite sure about yet as a scientific matter. But that's what it says, and I'll leave it up to you to kind of drill down on that yourself. I'm curious too what those 100 ingredients might be, but that is a compelling reason to favor breast milk if it's true. Breast milk, unequivocally, without a doubt, is easy and easier to digest than formula, which is essentially, or most commonly, cow's milk that has been modified to make it more digestible for babies. Formula also comes, it's also derived from soy milk in some cases. The vast majority of formula is modified cow's milk. I think there's even other forms of formula beside cow's milk and soy milk, but none of them are going to be as gentle and easy on your baby's tummy as mom's breast milk. And I personally believe, and I think there's a basis to believe, that you are not going to have tummy troubles with breast milk. You want my personal opinion? I mean, I think a lot of the issues that babies encounter in their early going that we seem to be at a loss for, they refer to it as colic or extreme fussiness, or, these prolonged bouts of crying, not being able to soothe the baby. I'm not saying that I can just pin it all on just one or two things, but I think the prime suspects, in my opinion, are either formula instead of breast milk because it causes upset stomach, or at least it's not as easy to digest for their brand spanking new immature digestive systems, or just lack of sleep and babies are tired or overtired or overly fatigued. Obviously, there are probably other reasons why a baby might be colicky, but based on my research and learning and experience, I've got my finger on those two as the prime suspects. Breast milk is never going to give your baby constipation, and I don't mean to suggest that if you formula feed that you're necessarily going to have those issues, but I wouldn't be surprised if you encounter at least some tummy troubles with formula, and perhaps you might see some constipation, although I wouldn't necessarily expect it. But you're never going to have those problems with breast milk. I wouldn't expect that anyway. Additionally, breast milk, and critically, I would say, breast milk helps to populate your baby's gut microbiome. And it comes into the world with this new or nascent gut microbiome, and it's the breast milk that helps to seed and populate that gut microbiome. What do I mean by that? Look up gut microbiome because it's so very important for human health in general, adults and kids alike. But the more we learn about this stuff, and as the research unfolds, it just seems to be ever more important. The gut microbiome refers to the trillions of microorganisms that live inside of each of us, um, uh, in our digestive tracts, and help to not just break down nutrients in food and absorb those nutrients into the bloodstream so that they can make their way into our organs, but also these microorganisms are good and beneficial, and they help to build and support our immune system. It's crazy the way people talk about it online nowadays, and I don't know how long folks have been talking about our digestive system and the gut microbiome in this way, but people, doctors, scientists, experts will refer to it even as like a second brain or a second heart or a command center, a CPU of sorts. And it kind of makes sense. I mean, what else are we other than the foods we eat and put in our mouth? It's that common adage about you are what you eat, but the more you live and breathe and learn in this world, the more that appears to be true. In any event, we need all that good bacteria, good beneficial bacteria, fungi, other microorganisms, to support the digestive system, also to crowd out the bad bacteria. So you've heard of the term probiotics. Probiotics just basically means good bacteria. Antibiotics that your doctor may prescribe to you when you're sick, if it's indicated, kills bacteria. Probiotics supplies good beneficial bacteria, and it's found in mother's breast milk. Incidentally, my understanding is that formula more recently, and I don't know how long this has been happening, but formula nowadays, they make it with probiotics, prebiotics, which is another word for soluble fiber, which is basically food for the beneficial bacteria and microorganisms in your gut. Critically important to human health in general is fiber. But they've started adding these components to formula now, as well as things like omega-3 fatty acids, but these are all things that are naturally found in breast milk. Breast milk also supplies antibodies or antibodies to build the immune system. They contain cells called macrophages that kill bad bacteria, fungi, and viruses. So they have antimicrobial properties, or breast milk has antimicrobial properties that you are not going to find in formula. And those antibodies don't just build the immune system, but they protect against allergies, because the foods that mama's eating and passing along to the baby, it helps its new budding young system distinguish between food and pathogens, so you don't have an inflammatory response to something that's essentially food for the human body, which is what allergies are. So breast milk will reduce the incidence, which is the rate of occurrence, but also the severity of allergies and infections. I believe it's fairly well substantiated that breast milk fed babies suffer fewer colds, ear infections, and the like. Listen to this. Incredibly, the composition of breast milk changes with your baby's needs, and its composition is different in the morning than it is at night, and it's different in month 1 than it is in month 2. So as your baby grows, mom's breast milk will just naturally and automatically supply a different mix of fats, proteins, and nutrients to support your baby's growth in this ever-changing way. I mean, how incredible is that? And that's something that formula can't possibly do. And if we take nature's word for it, it's always going to be the right mix of those macro and micronutrients. At least there's reason to believe that. Breast milk is always in stock. It's always on tap. It's always the right temperature. Dad, if you're heating formula in the microwave, or even breast milk in a bottle for that matter, but when you're heating liquids in a microwave, people will tell you you ought to be careful, because you might take a sip on it and it might feel like it's the right temperature, but the microwave will heat the liquid unevenly. So in the middle of the glass or the cup, it might be scaldingly hot and it could burn your baby. You don't have that problem with breast milk because it's always the right temperature. It's always sterile. It's always clean. I mentioned in a prior video that the mom's body even prioritizes breast milk, such that not only does the breast milk have the nutrients that your baby needs, even if mom isn't eating well, mom's body will tap into her own personal stores of those nutrients, like draw calcium from the bones, for example, um, to manufacture the breast milk, to make sure that it's good, even if it's to the mom's detriment. And also, if there's toxins or bad things in the mom's body, the her body will filter those things out to some extent in producing the breast milk. It is advisable not to have any alcohol at all when you're breastfeeding. I'll leave it to you and mom to decide whether one single occasional drink here and there is acceptable or not. I think it probably is, and that seems to be the advice that you get from people. But guess what? It's not a one-to-one ratio there. Even with that one drink, which is probably okay, your baby is only getting a fraction, proportionally even, of the alcohol that mom is consuming. So there's these kind of prophylactic aspects to breast milk. Breast milk is cheap. How cheap? It's free. Doesn't get any cheaper than that, right? And formula can be expensive, especially the formula that comes pre-mixed and ready-made, ready to go right out of the bottle. That can be quite pricey. And lastly, there's many health benefits to mom, and I don't have a lot of time to talk to you about that, but look it up, and I'm sure mom and the woman in your life will, look into that herself. But it's breastfeeding stimulates the release of oxytocin, which is the love and bonding chemical. It burns approximately 500 calories a day, so it helps mom shed pregnancy weight, which may not be the top priority, but it's a good thing. It helps accelerate the tearing down of the scaffolding and all the construction that went up when her body was gearing up to deliver the baby, and things are happening internally. Well, after the baby's delivered, you got to kind of, it's a big production, right? And you got to internally, things have to happen where you're getting back to the pre-pregnancy way of things, and breastfeeding helps kind of accelerate those things. And it protects mom against cancer even. At least that's what the research so far suggests, or more than suggests, that it can insulate or at least protect mom to some degree from all kinds of cancer. So breast milk is truly remarkable. In fact, I'll add something else. I mean, it's got all these amazing properties where you'll read where, if you have sore or cracked bleeding nipples, mom can apply some breast milk to her nipples and obtain some relief there. Although I suggest that maybe you don't just let it dry there, because then, I don't know, some people will say it could be a breeding ground for bacteria, and then mom's milk ducts could get infected, or baby might get sick if there's bacteria there. But it's got healing properties. I mean, I've read that even on your own, cuts or burns or something, you could apply breast milk to that. For cradle cap on your baby's head, which is just the dry, scaly, patches of skin on his head, it's perfectly normal. I don't think there's any reason to worry about cradle cap, actually, but it seems to help with that if you want to try that. It's just an incredibly wonderful, just a superfood that, you'll even, I mean, nutritionally, I think it's not bad for any of us to consume breast milk. And I'm not suggesting you go out and start doing that, but it just kind of helps illustrate what a good quality, powerful punch of nutrition it is for your baby. And it's especially important in the first 3 months when your baby is so brand new, has a very immature digestive system, has a very new and young immune system, and breast milk is going to help it get the best start in life. What are the main issues that you should think about, dads, when it comes to your wife or girlfriend's breastfeeding? I have 6 things for you to think about. The first thing would be to not stress. Don't stress yourself out about it, and don't stress mom out about it. She's probably going to be very mindful of it on her own. Chances are she's going to want to breastfeed and do it successfully for as long as possible, or at least that she wants to give it a good go. And it's important, first and foremost, just to be supportive. So don't stress, but do learn as much as you can about it so that you might be able to help her with it, or at least understand what she's going through, and do support mom. The second thing you want to think about is to take care of mom. And I guess this is being supportive, but make sure mom gets enough food to eat, enough water to drink, and enough sleep. Mom should be eating as well as she possibly can, just like she was while she was pregnant. I mentioned a minute ago that even if she's not getting the perfect blend of micronutrients, the body will still endeavor to produce breast milk at the highest quality, even if it means tapping into her own personal stores. But look, again, I mean, that's probably not the best thing for mom's own health. But secondly, I wouldn't count on that. I mean, even if it's a biological or physiological fact, I mean, you have every reason in the world, as the father and the husband in the house, or the man in the house, to try to make sure that your whole family's eating well, and that you help mom eat well. And, she's going to be very, very tired around the clock when she's breastfeeding. I would say it's your job to make sure that she's eating well, not because she doesn't want to, but because she's just not going to be able to do it all herself. So make sure she's eating well, make sure she's getting enough water to drink. You don't need to give her more water, or mom doesn't need to drink more water than she ordinarily would. Just make sure that she's sufficiently hydrated. In fact, I think experts will tell you it may be counterproductive to drink too much water. But just make sure she's getting enough, about as much as she would be getting otherwise, but not less. And as far as sleep, it's good for the body, it's good for mom's milk production, it's good for the functioning and operation of her body in general. So try to make sure she gets as much rest as she does. And if that means that you're helping with the breastfeeding, or helping put the baby down, or helping soothe and put the baby back down while he's napping, that's good, because mom can take her naps during that time and she doesn't have to worry about it. The third key issue to think about when it comes to breastfeeding is kind of the nuts and bolts of breastfeeding, and I've distilled it down to basically 2 key points. And these are really the keys in breastfeeding. I think if you talk to nurses and lactation consultants, they'll tell you this too. The keys to breastfeeding are proper latching and proper positioning of the baby so that you get a proper latch. If the baby is positioned so that it latches on properly, then you're gonna have a much easier time of it. You're far less likely to have sore nipples, because it turns out, as I understand it, that sore nipples, or even any kind of pain associated with the baby suckling on the nipple, doesn't have to do with the sucking itself, no matter how forcefully the baby is doing that. It has to do with the improper or the poor positioning and an improper latch. So, sore nipples or pain from breastfeeding because your nipples are sore, or mom's nipples are sore, that can get in the way of breastfeeding. It can be an obstacle. It could be something that interferes with that. So, learn as much as you can. Obviously, you're not going to be the one doing it, but heck, maybe you could even tell mom something about what you learn and help her learn something new that she may not have known before. At least, attend the breastfeeding classes with her or study it yourself so that you are partnering with her in the process and making her feel like she's not alone in this and that you're interested in this stuff too. And I will say, look, it's fairly interesting stuff if you want it to be. I know it was for me, even though I'm not the one breastfeeding. I think it's just interesting to understand how the body works and the miracle of the milk production, and how sometimes even just the proximity of the baby to mom or thinking about the baby will trigger the letdown, which is the flow of milk coming down through her breasts, even if the baby's not even there. It's kind of like when they say that, sometimes looking at food, we don't know it, but the stomach acids are already being kind of activated just by looking at food because, the gastric juices, we're preparing those gastric juices to digest the food. Even if we don't end up eating it, the body's gearing up for it. Well, the body does the same thing when it comes to breast milk. So learn and just look into latching and positioning. Good reason to invest in a breastfeeding pillow, as I mentioned in a prior video, because if it helps with the positioning, then it's going to help with the breastfeeding. It's not rocket science. It's not something that's going to take you days or weeks, but at least you'll know about those two key points, which are really the basics. And then when you're the partner in charge or the chief lieutenant helping out, you'll be able to bring some of that knowledge to bear on the breastfeeding experience, and I think mom will appreciate it. The fourth point is to try as hard as you can to get full feedings. And I made this point in prior videos repeatedly because it's so very important to the fourth trimester. The fourth trimester, as I've said, is all about full feedings and good naps. In fact, I would say the first year of a baby's life is about full feedings and good naps. Even as the wake time enlarges or expands after the first month to become kind of a separate, distinct thing where you have some wake time after a feed, and then that wake time gets longer and longer as the baby gets older and older. Even then, I would say the most important thing for your baby's development is full feedings and good naps. If the baby is well nourished and well rested, you don't have to worry about a lot of other developmental milestones, in my opinion, because they will just happen naturally the way they're supposed to, because your baby is running on all cylinders, is very alert, and he is instinctually he's born into the world with this like native curiosity, and it's like, his antenna, he's just constantly scanning and looking at the world around him, taking in the sights and sounds. They are just new supercomputers and learning machines. You don't even have to teach them a lot of things. They can figure things out on their own, but they need good nourishment and they need good rest. So make sure you're getting full feedings. Another reason, which is very important, why you want to get full feedings, here's some information you might not be aware of, but when a mother is breastfeeding for the first 5-10 minutes or so, give or take, her body is going to be producing something called foremilk, which is kind of like skim milk. It's higher in lactose or sugar, lower in fat and protein. It's more liquidy. So it's called the thirst quencher, and it satisfies your baby's need for hydration and also gives them some nutrients, but it's kind of the beginning of the meal. And it's only after 10 or 15 minutes, maybe even longer, according to some people, where you get what's called the hind milk. And the hind milk is the good, fatty, filling, creamy milk that is full of fats and more protein, more vitamins, minerals, nutrients that are really going to pack on the ounces and pounds. And if you are not getting full feedings from a breast or both breasts, then you may be depriving your baby of that hind milk, which is so very important. It is one major reason to try to strive for full feedings and not just feed, have the baby grazing or snacking throughout the day, because he may not be getting as much or any of the hind milk. And so if you don't have a full feeding, he's going to wake up sooner from his naps because he's hungry, and he's going to fall asleep at the breast more quickly because he didn't get a full nap, and he's not going to eat as well. And when he falls asleep, you're going to think, okay, I'll just let him sleep, when all he got is the foremilk, and that cycle will continue in the wrong direction. So you got to get full feedings because it helps the baby get good naps. But the reason it helps the baby get the good naps is because you're getting the hind milk towards the end of a feeding on a breast. And those are the calories that are really going to help your baby sleep his best. There's different schools of thought about whether you stay on one breast for a feeding / cycle or you switch breasts. I can tell you what we did is we switched. So on every feeding, we went 15 to 20 minutes on one side, 15 to 20 minutes on the other side. But my views are kind of evolving, because looking back over my notes and going through these books again, I think there's something to be said about doing single side feeding, which is that you completely drain or empty the breast at one feeding. Of course, it's never completely drained or emptied because the body's just producing milk and it's resupplying the milk as it's being released. But you really go fully on one breast, and then the next cycle you switch to the other breast. That might be a way of ensuring that you're getting all that hind milk. In our experience, it didn't seem to be a problem. Just looking at the way things played out for us, and also looking at it the way he grew, I think we were probably giving him the hind milk, even switching breasts. But I will caution and tell you that we were super diligent about making sure he went at least 15 minutes on one side before we switched to the other side. If we got to 20 minutes and he was still nursing, then we would switch sides. And if we went past 15 minutes and let's say 16, 17 minutes, it seemed like he was done with that side, then we would switch. But if he was still going, we would always go all the way to 20 minutes before switching to the other side. So talk to your doctor and your nurses and lactation consultants and other folks about that. And you can decide for yourself after some study and introspection whether you want to switch sides every feeding or just do single side feeding. But you got to make sure that your baby's getting full feedings so that he can get the foremilk and the hind milk. I mentioned in a previous video, but I'll say it again. Newborns need to sleep around the clock. In the first week, it's something like 17 to 19 hours a day, which means you will often see him falling asleep at the breast. Just woke up from a nap, you start feeding, he's hungry, he's giving hunger cues or even crying because he's hungry, so you put him on and he's nursing. But then after 10 minutes or so, he might fall asleep. You gotta wake him up and make sure that he gets a full feeding. I talked about some of the ways that you might gently wake your baby up in those instances. You can rub gentle circles in the palm of his hand while he's at the breast, and I did that. You can rub his back, you can caress his face, you can rub circles or on the soles of his feet, or just rub his feet. I mentioned in a prior video that I would tickle my son's feet, and then I read in the Secrets of a Baby Whisperer book, I'd forgotten, but the author there had said, never tickle a baby's or a newborn's foot. That would be like me reaching under the table while you're eating and tickling your feet. Fair enough, although I will say it's not like I was tickling his feet to make him laugh or to get a rise out of him. It was just a very gentle tickling motion, just to kind of jog him and wake him up so that he could continue nursing. But you can gently form circles in the palm of his hand. You can stroke his face. You can rub his feet. Uh, I'm sure there's other ways of gently waking him up, but you got to do it. And in our experience, what happened with our son, at some point, when he's fully fed, he will just manifestly refuse the nipple. I mean, our son, he wouldn't just, it wasn't that he was falling asleep. He would like purse his lips, maybe turn away from the breast or just close his mouth, just adamantly refusing the nipple. And then you knew that he was probably full. And he wasn't asleep. He was doing that while he was still awake. How many feedings a day? Look into it yourself, because every baby's a little different, or maybe a lot different, and I can't tell you a hard and fast rule that's going to govern your baby's life, because I don't know anything about your life and your baby. But I think a rule of thumb that I think is helpful to think about, at least just have it in the background and kind of keep it in mind, is that you want to strive for 8 to 10 full feedings in a 24-hour cycle in the first month. Shoot for 8, but 9 or 10 are acceptable. In the first week, I think your hospital's discharge papers, and I mentioned previously, they might say 8 to 12, and I think that's good, in the first week especially. 8 to 12 feedings a day means that you're putting the baby to the breast every 2 to 3 hours. But I think after the first week or so, 12 is not where it's at, because mom's milk will have come in by that point, and putting him to the breast every 2 hours, given how long it takes to breastfeed, it won't leave enough time for your baby to get a good quality nap. And it's not necessary. I think the target is closer to 3 hours, although 2.5 hours is fine. And again, this 2.5 to 3 hour range, it's not a technical, rigid, fixed thing, because one cycle to another, your baby may nap longer or shorter. Everything could vary. So it's not about it being precisely 2.5 or 3 hours or something necessarily in the middle. It could be a little less than 2.5. It could be a little more than 3 hours since the last feeding, and that's all okay. These are just good benchmarks to keep in mind. But I don't think after the first week or so you want to feed every 2 hours or 12 times a day. You want to be shooting for 8 feedings a day. 9 is okay and 10 is okay, but as I've said before, if you're getting 8 feedings a day, it suggests to me that your baby is getting more of those full feedings, and you'll probably see longer naps, an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4, even 2 hours. At some point, if he's napping longer than that and it's getting close to 3.5 or 4 hours from the last feeding, you may need to wake baby up, especially in the case of breastfed babies. You want to be kind of tethered to that 2.5 to 3 hour cycle. With formula fed babies, folks will tell you that it could be 3 to 4 hours, but newborns need to feed every 3 to 4 hours. They are not metabolically, it's not a good idea for them to go longer than that. But I think 8 feedings in a 24-hour cycle, especially after the first week or so, the first few days when you're kind of getting settled and your things are stable or more stable and you got your arms around it, that ought to be the target for the first month. Second month, I would say 7 to 9 feedings. And the third month, I would say 6 to 8. What happened in the case of our son? We were really, really diligent about making sure he got full feedings, and I kept very, very good records of this. And when I went back and looked at it, it almost very cleanly played out that way, like divided into 1 month, 2 month, third month, where in the first month, I have the records. It was 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8, 8. I mean, it was pleasantly surprising to me looking back how many days we got 8 feedings a day, obviously at different times throughout the day, because the cycles are all different. It doesn't mean we fed exactly at 7 a.m. and then at 10 p.m. and then at 1 p.m. No, well, we just worked off of an approximate 2.5 to 3 hour cycle and then kept records. And then looking back, boy, it turned out to be 8 feedings almost every day. Sometimes 9 feedings, and that's fine. Occasionally, maybe a small handful of times, even in the first month, it would be 7, just based on the way the cycles played out. But we got 8 feedings a day, the vast majority of the days in the first month. And then looking at the second month, almost around the time that the first month came to a close, we started seeing 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, 7, occasionally 8, even 9 in the second month, maybe early in the second month. But we never saw 10 in the first month. We never saw 10 in the second month. We sometimes saw 6 in the second month, a small handful of instances, kind of like we had in the first month with 7 feedings. But it was generally 7 feedings a day for the second month. And then when I look at the third month, it was 6, sometimes 7, maybe 8, seldom, but occasionally 5, but it was like 6, 6, 6. And even if that's not how it plays out with your baby, I think these are just decent targets to shoot for. Not that you're forcing anything, but I think they're just good targets to kind of aim for. And it ought to be the case as you go from the first month to the second month that the number of feedings drops. And I'll talk more about this in the next video when we're talking about sleep. Primarily the reason why you'll go from, let's say, 8 feedings a day to 7 feedings a day is because there's going to be 2 times in the middle of the night, say, 2 a.m. and 5 a.m., where mom's going to have to be feeding based on a 3-hour cycle, while around the time of the first month, sometime between weeks 3 and 6, give or take, those 2 midnight feedings are going to fold into 1 midnight feeding. And then sometime around the end of the second month, if you have given your baby full feedings and good naps for the first 8 weeks, you will see that last middle of the night feed disappear. So when we talk about sleeping through the night, it depends on how you define that. If sleeping through the night is defined by 7 to 8 continuous hours of sleep, let's say the last feeding is 11 o'clock, and then the next feeding is at 6 a.m., that's sleeping through the night. And that's pretty good for you and mom. She's going to be able to get almost a full night's rest by the end of the second month, or at least not too long after that, if you try to do things the right way and assuming that this is a full-term healthy baby, of course. So I've said it before and I'll say it again. These are opposite sides of the same coin. If you get full feedings, then you'll get good naps. And if you get good naps, then you'll get more likely to get full feedings. So I'll probably talk about breastfeeding in the next video as well. But that's just a preview of what's going to happen as far as sleep is concerned. The next thing you want to think about when it comes to breastfeeding is the 5th issue, is clogged milk ducts. Why should you care about that? Because mom's going to care about that. She's going to be the one dealing with it or suffering from it if it happens. And it's a common thing that could happen, and it could interfere with the breastfeeding. Clogged milk ducts can happen. I don't know exactly. I think it might just be happenstance. It's the flow of milk. Life is life, and nature's taking its course, and for whatever reason, a milk duct can get clogged. Maybe if there's milk left over on the breast or the areola afterwards, it can clog the ducts that way. But it's not uncommon, but you need to respond to it immediately so that it doesn't get worse, because if a clogged milk duct gets infected, it can lead to a condition called mastitis, which is inflammation of the breast or the mammary gland, and then that could really kind of interfere with the breastfeeding and even derail it. So you don't want to ignore a clogged milk duct. How will you know you have one? Mom will probably know better than you, but there's going to be, it might feel kind of warm or hot. There's redness, there's tenderness. She might feel something hard or like a lump there. Maybe some pain. And that happened to my wife one time. I think it didn't happen more than that because, like I said, we were very diligent about getting full feedings and emptying the breast as best we could, which I think helps. But it happened one time, and we had both studied this, and so I think we were both of the same mind. But I remember just suggesting that she immediately after the breast go take a warm shower, and she did. And she took a warm shower. She probably gently massaged that area, and the clogged duct cleared, and it didn't recur, and it didn't become inflamed, and it wasn't a problem for us. But you just want to kind of, again, it's not rocket science. Learn a little bit. If you're there supporting the effort and you're able to, be knowledgeable about this kind of issue, I think you'll be a hero in mom's eyes, and she won't feel like she's alone in it. So 3 things you could do with clogged milk ducts: make sure you keep breastfeeding on that side. If it's that side's turn and you're doing single side feeding, don't ignore it. Just muscle through it, so to speak. I mean, I can't, I don't, it depends how much pain mom is experiencing. I'm not necessarily telling you what to do, but I think the experts will tell you, like, it doesn't help to just stay away from that side because the breast will get more engorged and it could exacerbate the issue, the problem. You want to try to empty or drain that breast as much as you can, and that's going to help the duct clear. The second thing is warm showers or warm compresses. And the third thing is just gentle massage. There may be other ways of ameliorating or, just, helping with clogged ducts. But those are 3 things that you can do. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about is burping. And I won't spend too much time on it because there's not a whole lot to it. You just need to understand that the gassiness and the need to burp and the fussiness or the crying that comes from being gassy comes from the fact that baby is sucking in air bubbles when he's at the breast, invariably. And of course, they have an immature esophagus, immature, throat sphincters, and but they're also sucking in these air bubbles, and it's causing them discomfort, and they don't understand it, so they cry. It's crazy because my whole life I grew up thinking there was only one way to burp a baby because it's the same thing you saw everyone else doing, and grew up thinking that was how you burped a baby. And you watch TV and movies, everybody's just patting the baby on the back, ba 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 ba, smacking, slapping the baby on the back. And sometimes you're out and about and you see people kind of smacking their baby a little hard on the back, and you're wondering how it feels for a newborn or a young infant. I'm here to tell you there's a better way, and I think you ought to give it a shot and see how it works for you. I mean, I didn't make this up. I learned it in one of the books. It might have been the Baby Whisperer book, might have been more than one of the books, but here's what I did. I would have my son on my lap, just like sitting on my legs, facing this way, imagine. So he's parked on my leg and he's facing this way, and I have my hand under his chin to support his head, because you may already know, but it's very, very important to always support and cradle a newborn's head because their heads are so big and heavy relative to the rest of their body and the strength of their neck muscles that it could be dangerous not to provide support for their head. In fact, that's the reason why you should never shake a baby, because you can cause brain damage from the whiplash effect on their brain stem from the shaking, because their neck muscles are not strong enough to support that big head. So I would have my son on my legs, in my lap, with my hand under his chin to support his head, and he's facing that way. And then I would just gently rub, or even firmly, but not smacking, just rub circles on his lower back on his left side. So it would be right here for me, in the back. That's where your stomach is. Obviously, it's an internal organ, but that's where it is. It's kind of on your back side, on the left side. And it worked like a charm. Every time in my life, I got a nice, good, juicy burp. It never failed. And I never, ever had to smack my son on the back. Is he going to be traumatized if you do it that way? No. But, humans have been doing it that way for so long. And, obviously we get burps most of the time or all the time doing it that way. But you don't need to. If you just rub nice circular motion, as firmly as you need to, right kind of on the small of his back on the left side where the stomach is, I think you're going to get a burp every time. Um, so let me just look over my notes, see if I've missed anything. I don't think I have, but feel free to let me know if you have any questions about any of that. And uh, good luck on your adventure. I'll see you next time. Thanks.